community. So it takes courage to be here and courage to want to change the course of epilepsy as we know it. So thank you all for being here. And I want to get a sense of who is in the room. And I know we can't get a sense of who is watching online, because what's great about this meeting actually is that it is a hybrid and there are a number of people tuning in right now. But I want to get a sense of who's in this room. So if you could wave your hand if you're a healthcare provider, wave your hand. Great. And a researcher, wow, great. And a nonprofit professional, wow. And then a person living with epilepsy or a family member or have been bereaved by epilepsy, welcome. And then a representative from industry, great. Any medical examiners here? We're working on that group. And did I miss anybody? So as you can see, we're a really diverse community. PAME exists to leverage this diversity and to bring people together to better understand and ultimately prevent mortality. Partnership is the heart of PAME, and having families and people living with epilepsy as part of the dialogue is fundamental to PAME's mission, which is about convening, educating, and inspiring all stakeholders to promote understanding and drive prevention. Let's see here. Let's see. Whoops, my slides aren't there. I'm sorry. Okay, I don't think I have my slides. This is Jeff's. I just have a few slides, but I'll go without slides. It's all right. Mine weren't interesting, except for I had a big thank you slide. Okay. Shoot. Nope. Sorry. Okay. So PAME's mission is about convening, educating, and inspiring. And we believe that we'll make progress faster by including as many voices and perspectives as possible. There's this African proverb that says, we are a rock. Well, I can't remember it now. I didn't write it down. I was just reading it this morning. It was on the slide. You know, we can be as strong as a rock, basically, if we're together. If we're not, we're just sand. So I'm really excited for today's program. It's a new format for PAME. Previous meetings had been 2.5 days long and not in conjunction with the AES annual meeting. So we'll be eager for your feedback about this new format. Today, we have 4 very different and robust plenary sessions that shine a light on various aspects of mortality, research, and prevention. So the conference goals are really fourfold. It's to increase knowledge of premature epilepsy mortality, to learn from different experiences. So I hope it breaks. You can meet other people. The families are wearing the purple lanyards. The professionals and nonprofit folks are wearing the green lanyards. The third goal is to identify opportunities to expand research, drive prevention, and improve care of persons living with epilepsy, including care of the bereaved, and then to join a growing network of people and organizations. So I had this awesome thank you slide, but it's not there. And I think you saw them as we were walking into this meeting, and we will find it again to put up, because there's so many organizations that we need to thank for making this meeting possible. We wouldn't be here without all of that support. So thank you very much. I also want to thank AES. They are PAME's home, and they have provided generous in-kind assistance in planning and organizing this meeting. I especially want to thank Ann Gramiak, way down there. Ann, wave your hand. She's been everything to making this meeting possible, and not only is she organized, but she's the loveliest person to work with, and I mean that sincerely. We adore Ann. And then I want to thank the planning committee that has met. You guys can stand. You will see all these faces on the podium throughout the day. Wave. They've met every other week for the past year to plan this meeting and to plan PAME moving forward. So now, quickly, a few housekeeping things. There is a family lounge. This can be an intense, hard meeting for families, especially if you've never sat through this science content. So at the family lounge is in the Water Tower Conference Room, which is past the bathrooms down there. This meeting will be recorded, and it will be posted online by the end of the month. There will be a Q&A session after every session. Please, for those of you who are online, fill up that chat. Throw whatever questions you have in there, and also feel free to introduce yourselves to one another online. Say where you're from and why you're here. And please, in your questions, make sure they're generalizable. We're not really able to answer patient-specific questions. And lastly, the meeting evaluation will be critical, so you'll get a QR code or it'll be available online at the end of this meeting. Okay, now I'd like to share a family story with you. You're about to see a short video that is part of a larger campaign that the Epilepsy Foundation has developed called We Need to Talk About It. Throughout today, we will watch a few of these videos. I want to thank EF for allowing us to have a sneak peek of this campaign. I want to especially thank the Perrys, who we'll hear from now.
We need to talk.
Sorry. There it goes.
We need to talk.
We need to talk.
Kayla is the youngest of 3 kids.
She's a daddy's girl, energetic, artsy, athletic.
Kayla was diagnosed at the age of 11. She had her bowl of grits and she dropped them. I looked at her kind of odd and I was like, "What's wrong with you?" She was like, "Ma, I don't know." And then I noticed again she had a tremor. The pediatric neurologist diagnosed her with what's called JME, which is juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. Her epilepsy was triggered by lack of sleep.
It was July 6th. She was not feeling well and she had had some seizures at work and she was going home. So I immediately left work early. She looked tired and I just said, "Do you want anything to eat? Do you need anything? Just make sure you lay down. Daddy, I'm fine." So I left her about 4:30, 3:45. I knew I needed to go pick up my wife because that day was also our anniversary. My wife and I, we go out to dinner.
So we probably come back in the house around 10. And I hit the steps to go up to Kayla's room to check on her. And the first thing that I noticed was that she was face down in the pillow. I go over to her and I touch her and she's still a little warm. But when I try to move her, she felt like a sack of bricks.
I hear this scream from my wife calling my name. And so I run into the room and I noticed that she was just not responding.
We began to work CPR on her. And when the paramedics get there, they put her on the machine and we're still breathing and they tell us she's gone.
I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that my daughter was gone. I just couldn't believe it.
And I would say that was probably the most horrible day of our lives.
We have the same birthday, May 9th. My anniversary is July 6th. The day she passed is an emptiness that I can't feel. If we'd have known that SUDEP existed, along with the sleep deprivation, we would have changed a lot of things in how we monitor her, and particularly probably how she monitored herself.
No one ever gave us a pamphlet. No one ever put anything in our hands. No one ever gave us a website or a link and said, you know what, you might not really be ready for this, but why don't you read it anyway? Never. So I know that there's a big need for more education and awareness about SUDEP.
I think the more knowledge that individuals have and more information that families have and that individual themselves who's dealing with epilepsy, the more they're able to handle it and manage it.
We need to talk about SUDEP
We need to talk about SUDEP
to end SUDEP.
Thank you for sharing the story of Kayla. And now I'd like to introduce the next two speakers. I'm going to introduce them both now. Our next speaker is no stranger to PAME. Dr. Jeff Buchhalter is the brainchild behind PAME. Come on up. He's given so generously of his time, expertise, and heart. He embodies the spirit of PAME, and this movement we're part of would not be where it is today without Jeff. Though he's an epileptologist, a pediatric epileptologist and researcher, he's always the first in the room to ask about the family experience. We're so lucky to have him. After Jeff, I'll just introduce Tom while I'm at it. Tom Stanton will speak after Jeff, and he has also been part of this effort since the beginning. He's arguably the world's best uncle. As many of you know, Tom has been running the Danny Did Foundation, which he and his family established in honor of sweet 4-year-old Danny, who died from SUDEP nearly 13 years ago. Tom has the hugest heart and the calmest presence, and through his efforts, he has helped to make steady inroads in helping families understand and prevent the risks of epilepsy. Thank you to both of them for being here and their leadership.
Thank you, Gardiner, for the very, very kind introduction, and welcome everyone. Seeing all these familiar and new faces is a real, I think, real experience for all of us that have been involved with PAME through the years. The title of the talk is Why Are We Here? Problem Overview and Evolution of PAME. Why was that? Why did I choose to speak about this? Because Gardiner told me to. Gardiner has really led us through the years. So, some disclosures, none of which are conflicts. So, why are we here? And that's the easy and a tragic question to answer. We're here because of premature mortality in epilepsy. It affects the very young, the older, and it knows no bounds. So that's the why, and that's what brings us together. Now, what's the problem? And I chose this Google image of a snapshot because what I'd like to do, just in a few words, really, is describe the problem. And one could even just kind of think about it as the sort of the epidemiology. You know, what's the scope of the things? How many lives are lost? Frequency, populations, risk factors. And it's hard to do this because there have been so many contributors to this field. We're going to hear about the basic science later, but I do want to emphasize that ultimately, I think that's where the cures are going to come. So the issue of death in epilepsy is not new. You know, that expression, there's nothing new under the sun, is certainly true with regard to mortality in epilepsy. And this introduction from The Lancet in 1868 really has a lot of the elements that we live with today. Not all, of course, but the concepts of the immediate cause of death in epilepsy is a matter which is not always easily solved. True then, true now. It's not frequently discussed, and PAME is all about that discussion. What the comment points out is that because relatively few people with epilepsy actually die in the hospital, we haven't known a lot about it because that's where a lot of investigation comes from. Most occurs, as you heard from the Perry's story, at home. And then the idea of the incurable, the intractable epilepsies. So it's been thought about for a long time. Dr. Orrin Davinsky, who's been a leader in the field, created a classification in 2016, which is a very useful jumping off point just for thinking about what are the causes and classification of epilepsy-related deaths. And you see them here. Sorry about that, it's probably my wife. How's it going? And the large groups are deaths directly related to epilepsy, those due to symptomatic seizures, and one thinks about status epilepticus, but what we've learned in the last decade or so is about Norse, for example, and the leadership of Nora Wong and the scientists that have moved this field along. Deaths indirectly due to epilepsy, pneumonia, and suicide. Very, very important, not only because of the human tragedy, but because they're potentially preventable. And finally, the loss of life due to the underlying disorders, particularly the neurodegenerative disease, and again, in the last decade or two, the developmental epileptic encephalopathies. So this is sort of the universe of considerations. I'm going to talk most about sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. For those of you that haven't seen this before, this is a quick definition that really set things off. It was in 1997 by Lena Nasheff and Fred Anagers. The top bullet describes sudden unexpected non-traumatic death in a person with epilepsy without post-mortem exam evidence of structural or toxicological cause of death. In 2012, the definition was updated and provided a lot more detail that really has facilitated research. When SUDEP sort of came into the scene in the early 2000s, there were some wild estimates of how frequently SUDEP occurs in the population. And some, some very reputable sites had it as frequently as 50,000 losses per year. The work of David Thurman, Dale Hestorfer, and other epidemiologists published a paper that helped put some real numbers on it. And so what you see on your far right is the estimate was about 6,000 deaths per year. And we all know this is an underestimate because of poor reporting and surveillance data. But that was an order of magnitude. But was a big surprise for many was the red bar on the left. SUDEP accounted for the largest number of lost lives. And I think that was the big wake-up call to say that this isn't a rare kind of thing. This is a major cause of premature mortality. There was sort of the immediate reaction of, in the context of the world, how big a public health issue is 6,000 people per year, although it's a horrific individual issue. And this paper published by Dr. Thurman, I think, answered that. This looked at potential years of life lost. And the conclusion was, because SUDEP affects so many young people, the number of potential years of life lost is greater than everything other than stroke. So it is a huge public health issue. This paper published in 2008 by Dr. Torbjørn Thompson, again a leader in the field, sort of did two things. On the vertical axis is SUDEP losses per 1,000 patient years, and on the horizontal axis are studies grouped by where they occurred. What you can see in the lower left-hand corner are population estimates, and you see it's basically 1 to 1.5 per patient 1,000 years on the left, and on the right are estimates from basically intractable epilepsy situations. And this really set the theme for not only the epidemiology, but also for the risk factors. In 2017, there was sort of a landmark publication by the American Academy of Neurology, a guideline. And this put out to the world of neurology that you need to talk to people. It shouldn't be optional. The underline gives the estimates. And it says that for adults, it's 1 in 1,000. For kids, it's 1 in 4,500. And almost immediately, within a few months of this publication, it was proven, the numbers were proven to be wrong, which was a real bummer, because it took about 10 years to get this published. And that's the whole political thing with SUDEP. The numbers, the real and the best numbers initially came out of Sweden, Dr. Svensson and Dr. Thompson, the incidence of SUDEP. And in Sweden, they could do epidemiology that we have, that's impossible in the United States. They were able to find most, if not all, of the deaths and actually review the medical records. And what you can see on the right, 1.1 and 1.29 are pretty much the same. So the incidence in children and adults you can consider as equivalent, and therefore all the strategies, many of the strategies for prevention, should be applied to children as well. This work was confirmed very shortly thereafter by Dr. Elizabeth Donner's group at SickKids in Toronto. And the numbers in the red box, Dr. Donner group found 1.45. This is compared to the adult numbers used by the AAN of 1.29, essentially equivalent. So in Sweden, in Canada, children and adults are affected equally. Moving on to risk factors, a huge literature that I just want to make 2 points. The first is that study after study has demonstrated that generalized tonic-clonic seizures are the major risk factor. And this is just a list of studies that you see here. The publication was by Dr. Dale Hestorfer, another major mover in the field. And the rest of the studies are different ways of saying that generalized tonic-clonic seizures are a very bad thing, and going from 10 a year or 20 a year to 5 is good, but the risk of SUDEP is still way up there. So we cannot be satisfied with really anything less than a cure, even though we know sometimes that's not achievable. Last year, Dr. Svensson's group again came out with an important paper. And, I don't need to read it to you, but I think you probably, like me, were stunned by the numbers. Increased risk of 27 times generalized tonic-clonic seizures. Nocturnal seizures, another risk factor, increases the risk 15 times. And then what really came to the fore and had been bubbling up is the importance of nocturnal surveillance. The last bullet, not sharing bed, that really is not sharing a bedroom, someone in the room. And the risk was increased 67 times. Huge. This is a big issue. In the pediatric world, monitoring children during sleep is usual. In the adult world, not the same. Young adults shouldn't be supervised when they're in bed, when they go to college, when they live independent lives. So this is, I think, just as kind of a seminal finding. In about 2016, Orrin Davinsky and Dan Friedman were talking about cases of sudden unexpected death in epilepsy with benign central temporal epilepsy. The key word is benign. It's supposed to go away. It's not a word that the ILE uses anymore. But I was personally so struck by this finding, I said to Dan, I can't believe it. Because when we talk about SUDEP in the office, are you really going to talk about dying to a family that's supposed to be benign? And again, without reading the slide, these were 3 individuals, and I insisted on looking at the reports myself, the records, and these were benign central temporal epilepsy, so-called. And these were individuals who had very few seizures, either none or 1 in the last year. This finding came out of the North American SUDEP registry from NYU, led by Dr. Davinsky and Friedman. And the red box is around juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. Again, something that's supposed to be benign, but as you heard from the parents of Kayla Perry, not benign. So our thinking about who is at risk has now expanded to the entire world of children and adults having seizures, with some notable exceptions. The conclusions from that paper, I won't read to you, but it basically says that no one is immune, and therefore the need to discuss the possibility of SUDEP with everyone. We're always remiss at PAME in not giving enough attention to the causes that are indirect, that are not SUDEP. And just 2 or 3 quick slides. This came out of the UK, looked at 50,000 individuals with premature or unnatural mortality, and found that the big risk factors were suicide and so-called poisoning of medications, particularly psychotropics and opioids, not anti-seizure medications. Pretty hard data. This is a paper by Dr. Elizabeth Donner, in which a group put together the causes of death in children. This is all deaths. And what you can see by the red bar is that the non-epilepsy related deaths were significantly greater than those that were caused by epilepsy. Furthermore, among those deaths, pneumonia was the leading cause. And this has been seen in other populations, which tells us this is a potentially preventable cause of mortality. I can't say that strongly enough. This paper I just wanted to bring to your attention was a review of all of the risk factors and the epidemiology that had so many data tables. As I started putting them on the slide, I said to myself, boy, this isn't going to work. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this, and I'll be happy to make these slides available to everyone so you can read about it. But this is a really terrific piece of work. So what's the summary of the problem? Premature mortality is a common, regrettably, outcome in epilepsy. It's not rare. It occurs across all ages and populations. Multiple causes have been identified. Risk factors have been identified, although it can affect anyone, and many of the causes are potentially preventable. There's a great paper recently from Scotland in which it was estimated that 60% of those premature deaths could have been prevented. So we have direction. Talk fast, Gardiner says. But this is my favorite part, because this is walking down memory lane. 2006, How did we get here? There was this swelling movement from EF and AES to say we need to do something about SUDEP. In 2007, there was a meeting in Chicago with EF, AES, CURE, and NINDS. This led to a workshop at the NINDS that Larry Hirsch and Nelson So really organized. The aftermath of that workshop was the SUDEP Coalition. And I almost forgot to say that in 2007, the people in the room in this great town, there were a number of them that said, we really shouldn't be talking about SUDEP. It was pretty terrible, but there's the state of the state. The SUDEP Coalition was loosely formed with the organizations that you see here. And then another thing happened. People like Tom Stanton said, it's not good enough to have the professionals managing this. We need to have the community. That came to fruition with the thought of having PAME that was discussed at an epidemiology meeting led by David Thurman. And in 2011, we were kindly adopted by AES, as Gardiner said. That's been our home. Elson So was our advocate. Mike Privatera, past president of AES, went along with it. But I read the email, and Mike said, this is a great idea. What if no one shows up? We're going to have a budget deficit. You got to know Mike to appreciate his concern. But people did show up. Briefly, the first meeting in 2012, and the decision was made then that this wasn't going to be a standard meeting where there's science and for a day or two, and then families and advocacy for a half day or a day. We elected a plenary format, so everyone was in the room at the same time. And that created all kinds of challenges, but it happened, as well as the opportunity for people who are living with epilepsy and bereaved to meet each other. Subsequently, we've had the meetings that are listed there. Obviously, COVID changed our direction, and again, AES was extraordinarily kind and allowed us to tag on our symposium at the beginning of the meeting, and that leads us to today. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and we will proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Buchhalter, and welcome everybody here today. As Gardiner mentioned, Tom Stanton, and I came into this world after my nephew Danny, who's on this slide here, passed away. It'll be 12 years ago next week. And Danny was 4 years old at the time, and he's our motivation, and like I said, brought us into this community. But I think what makes PAME really unique is that we have so many partners, so many different disciplines who care about trying to make progress. And each group has its own niche. Advocates and families are joining researchers and public health officials to drive our work forward. And over our 10 years plus in this space, we've seen more and more people and organizations getting involved and joining this fight. And I'm going to talk about some of those groups, some of those advocacy groups, public health efforts during this presentation. This is not an exhaustive list, but this just talks through some of our partners to PAME. So I'll start with the American Epilepsy Society. They have been kind of our backbone, as Gardiner mentioned. They're the convener to our work. I have to reiterate the special thanks to Anne for all that she does. But you can see here on this slide, what they do for PAME is really across the board. And they've really helped us grow over the last 18 months as we figured out new ways to do things. At the AES meeting that's going to be taking place beginning tomorrow, there'll be multiple sessions related to epilepsy mortality and 73 posters at the annual meeting that are tied into what we're talking about today. And I think, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we were probably talking about 3, 4, 5, 6 posters. So it's really amazing to see that. AES is also partnered to a awareness initiative that is underway with the Child Neurology Foundation that we're all very excited about. They've published multiple commentaries on this topic within Epilepsy Currents, and as Jeff mentioned, they were instrumental in the position statement that came out a few years ago. So we're grateful for everything that they're doing. The CDC has worked really diligently in surveillance. They have something called the Sudden Death in the Young Case Registry, which is now up to 13 states. They're really focused on surveillance and epilepsy self-management, with a special emphasis on the needs of people with epilepsy who live in rural settings. So this niche is really important because, as Jeff mentioned, the belief is there's an underrepresentation of how many deaths are actually captured. So this work is very important. So we thank them for what they're doing and continue to do. The Child Neurology Foundation, as I mentioned, they are working with several members of PAME to launch an awareness campaign next year that will be widespread and much needed. We partnered with them a few years back to help create brochures that try to stratify the risk for patients and families and give them something tangible to walk away with in the form of a brochure. They've worked with Dr. Buchhalter and others to create videos that providers can use to model how to have the discussion about the risk of mortality, which has been very beneficial. And this last bullet talks about their use of technology to try to automate or systemize the prompt to have this conversation with caregivers, which, when we think about the many different ways to approach this, I think this Chica project is really exciting for its potential, and it had great results in its pilot run. Chicago-based organization, Cure Epilepsy, has been a leading organization in terms of SUDEP research. You can see here some of the opportunities that they have for next year. But over the years, Cure has funded almost $5.5 million in SUDEP research, and that doesn't include their funding of sleep and other epilepsy research. So their leadership on this front has been instrumental, and we are super grateful for that. The Epilepsy Foundation of America has contributed on multiple fronts, as you can see across this slide here. The SUDEP Summit that they convened last fall brought together a lot of different players, multidisciplinary meeting, and the Gardiner will talk a little bit about the results from that and where they're going to go, because there was a lot of great ideas presented and possibilities. The bereavement aspect that they oversee and handle is so important. Just from the family perspective, where do you turn after you lose a loved one suddenly, and you don't know if anyone else has had that experience? So their work on that is critical and appreciated. I won't talk through all of these slides, but they have been very involved with PAME on multiple committees, and they're doing a lot of work in the epilepsy mortality space. So the North American SUDEP Registry is something that the EF refers cases to, along with other partners, to PAME. This is a registry based at New York University, headed up by Drs. Dan Freeman and Dr. Oren Davinsky. And the premise is just to collect cases of SUDEP, with the idea that if we get a better count on how often this is happening, we'll have more resources and more ability to move research ahead. So you can see here the scope of what they've done since 2013. Almost every state they've collected cases from, and there are about 5 states now that I think have legislation that require a referral into the NASAR registry, but this is a really important effort that complements other efforts that are going on in our community. So NIH has as you can see, increased their research spending on SUDEP for the last 5 years. They have 7 new SUDEP grants coming in this current fiscal year, and they have done a lot of work in the sudden death in the young registry. Thank Vicki Whittemore and all of her work and her team for the work that they're doing. This next slide shows kind of the ascent of their commitment to research funding, and they're projecting an increase for the years to come, which is encouraging. This next group is the Norse Institute, and this was established by a mom named Nora Wong after the loss of her son Daniel in 2013. This is the leading advocacy group on Norse, which, as you can see, is new onset refractory status epilepticus and fires. They started the first ever registry to capture cases of Norse and fires. They have created a partnership with Northwestern here in Chicago on giving resources to families for what to do after they get out of the hospital. They've doing work with Yale, and Nora has created a really resourceful and easy-to-use website that is a terrific resource. So we thank her and all of her efforts. And then I'll finish with our work at Danny Did. I have to start with recognizing my colleague, Mary Duffy, for all that she does with families in our community. We have several board members here today. We're local here, based in Chicago, and really grateful for our board and our staff. We've been, as Jeff mentioned, we've been involved with PAME since the beginning. Our niche is really focused on technology, and we worked with the Epilepsy Foundation this fall to host a device accelerator course, which basically tries to advance the ecosystem for companies who are interested to provide technologies or other types of therapies for our patients and families. And so we had 5 companies involved with that this year, all of them very promising. Our bread and butter, kind of our signature program, is to provide micro grants to families that allow them to access devices or other safety resources that they think can be beneficial in their home. And we've done that across the country and in 14 countries. So we're very proud of that. And let's see, I'll kind of close by saying, you know, we work very hard to get into the community, whether it's talking to schools, medical schools, other advocacy organizations, and companies, just to get them oriented. What is epilepsy? You know, how are they connected with seizures? And drilling down to, unfortunately, there is this reality that there can be sudden death, and there are issues of mortality that really plague our community. So just making that known is important to us, and we try to do that in concert with the other groups in our world. So there's more to do, obviously, but I hope that families can find some comfort and hope in knowing that we are committed partners. We share your sense of urgency. Your stories drive us ahead, and we're going to keep at this until we make progress. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Gardner.
Thank you, Jeff and Tom. Jeff, thank you for that really great summary, very sobering, the problem. And Tom, thank you for sharing all of that. It's really heartening to see all that has continued to flourish in recent years. So I have the privilege of announcing something really exciting. PAME has some new future directions. After a lot of feedback from many of you here and many discussions with a number of our stakeholders, we've decided to expand PAME's scope to have it be more than just one meeting that happens every other year, but to try to develop an ongoing effort that not only shares knowledge, but tries to further drive change by bringing partners together to collaborate and to identify gaps that need to be addressed. So I think I have a slide that should be here now. No, it's just like my slides don't want to work back there. Okay, I mean, he told me, okay, so maybe we just need to find, okay, don't worry about that slide. I can quickly summarize PAME's strategic priorities because I know them so well. So there are going to be 4 priorities moving forward that, there we go, thank you. The first is really to build an organizing structure. So as we've said earlier, that AES will continue to house this effort. They'll be our fiscal sponsor. This won't be its own organization, which is very important, we feel, because it helps to have the initiative owned by everyone in the community. So through this, building this structure, we'll also roll out a number of committees. Right now we have the governance committee. The second committee we're going to roll out is building on what Tom mentioned, the SUDEP Summit. That will become the SUDEP Research and Prevention Committee to carry forward all of the important recommendations and priorities that came out of that work. And then we'll continue to convene stakeholders, but try to find new ways that are relevant and meaningful. We'll continue with the webinar series that we created this past year. And we'll look for new ways to pull smaller groups together to drive change. And then we want to expand our educational offerings through how we communicate online. So look in January for a rollout of a new website that hopefully will become a hub to find all the partners working in this space and sort of a one-stop shopping place to learn about not just SUDEP, but all of the issues that Jeff talked on related to epilepsy mortality. And then we want PAME to be a source of inspiration. And that's why these stories and family participation is so important. So we want families to engage with us and to help motivate new audiences. And now we have a PAME promo video. None of us really wanted to star in this video, but we wanted to start trying to tell PAME's story and to offer ways for people to join us. So let's see if this works. So here we go.
Great progress has been made in understanding epilepsy, but awareness remains low, and many don't know that 1 in 26 individuals will develop epilepsy in their lifetime.
Even more don't know that people who have seizures are 3 times more likely to die prematurely than the general population, with sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, or SUDEP, being the leading cause of death.
Many deaths in epilepsy patients, whether it be from SUDEP, suicide, accidents, or status epilepticus, might be preventable. But mortality in epilepsy is poorly understood and seldom discussed. It's a public health problem that demands more attention.
There are amazing people in the epilepsy community, individuals and families who are impacted by the disease, healthcare providers, researchers, and advocates. PAME, or Partners Against Mortality in Epilepsy, was created to bring these different groups together, to forge connections, promote understanding, and encourage collaboration, so one day soon we can prevent epilepsy mortality.
I lost my child Joshua to SUDEP. The heartbreak and the loneliness is hard to overstate. PAME has helped me to find a community of people who understand my loss. It's also empowered me to get involved, to become a stronger advocate, to speak out, share my story, and work towards a future where no one with epilepsy dies prematurely.
I've been working in the SUDEP field for more than 20 years, but as a neurologist who treats children with epilepsy, the PAME meeting is so much more than a scientific conference. Getting to see families side by side, talking to researchers doing cutting-edge science, and clinicians who work at the front lines is really, truly inspiring. It always motivates me to go back and do more.
I was diagnosed with epilepsy at 18. The mortality can be a frightening topic to discuss. PAME has taught me knowledge is the best weapon. We can't prevent what we don't know, so it's critical to learn about SUDEP and the other epilepsy mortalities.
As a researcher, I recognize the importance of meeting with investigators in the field and making connections with healthcare providers, people with epilepsy, and bereaved families. These interactions are very critical to grounding our work and advancing the field.
And this is why PAME is so important. It's shining a light on critical but neglected issues and bringing people together to drive change. I'm really excited to say that PAME is now expanding its mission to have a greater impact, because nothing is more important than saving the lives of our loved ones. So please join us, because we're only as strong as we are united.
Thank you to all who participated in that video. And thanks for being here. And now it's time to get on with the meat of the meeting. So if I could invite the first panel up.